The air on Calavigny Island tasted of salt and betrayal. One moment, Hayley Devereux was the pregnant, adored wife of a tech billionaire. The next, she was a spectacle of public humiliation. Under the glittering lights of his lavish party, her husband, Sebastian, didn't just end their marriage. He detonated it. With his mistress clinging to his arm, he publicly renounced Hayley and the child she carried, leaving her stranded on his private paradise as a tropical storm gathered on the horizon. He thought he had erased her, but he made one fatal mistake. He left her alive. The journey to Calavigny Island began not with the gentle hum of the Gulf Stream G750, but with the subtle, chilling click of a platinum lighter. Sebastian Devereux lit his Cuban cigar, the cherry glowing like a malevolent eye in the jet's dim cabin. He didn't offer one to his associates, and he didn't look at his wife, Hayley, who sat across from him, her hands resting protectively on the swell of her 5-month pregnancy. "It has to be perfect, Jenna," he said, his voice a low baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors into handing over fortunes. The smoke he exhaled coiled towards the ceiling. "This party isn't just a party. It's a statement. It's the culmination of the Ethelred acquisition. Everyone who is anyone will be there. We need to project unassailable strength." Hayley managed a small smile. "Everything you do is perfect, Seb." It was the answer he expected, the one she had learned to give. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition of success, and she was its most beautiful, most serene installation. They had met 3 years prior at a Sotheby's auction. She was a junior art consultant, advising a client on a minor Degas sculpture. He wasn't bidding. He was buying the auction house. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, with a passion that felt alien in his world of algorithms and market capitalizations. For Hayley, a woman raised by a university professor and a librarian in a quiet corner of Connecticut, Sebastian was a force of nature. His ambition was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. He'd showered her with a life ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a villa in Lake Como, and a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He loved her, she believed, for being his anchor, his peace in a world of cutthroat competition. But the gilded cage, no matter how opulent, was still a cage. Her opinions on art were now used to decorate his corporate lobbies. Her friends with their normal jobs and mortgages were politely phased out in favor of his circle of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech titans. He had even chosen the dress she was to wear tonight, a flowing seafoam green gown by a designer she'd never heard of, one that was meant to showcase her pregnancy in the most elegant, non-threatening way possible. "The Beaumonts are arriving just after us." Sebastian continued scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. "Blake Beaumont is a potential board member for the new conglomerate. His wife, Victoria. She can be a bit much, but she's influential. Be charming to her." Hayley's smile tightened. Victoria Beaumont, a woman sculpted from marble and disdain, who looked at Hayley as if she were a charming but ultimately temporary pet. Victoria was from Sebastian's world, old money, predatory ambition, and a shared history that was often hinted at but never clarified. The jet began its descent, breaking through a layer of pillowy clouds to reveal a turquoise expanse dotted with emerald islands. In the center, like a jewel, was Calavigny. It was Sebastian's ultimate status symbol, an 80-acre private island in the Grenadines that he'd purchased for an obscene sum. He'd spent 2 years and $100 million transforming it into his personal fiefdom, a paradise of Balinese-style villas, private beaches and manicured jungle paths. As the plane touched down on the private airstrip, the cabin door opened to a wall of humid, fragrant air. A fleet of custom golf carts waited to whisk them to the main residence, a sprawling architectural masterpiece named the Overlook. Staff in crisp white uniforms lined the path, their heads bowed. It was a royal welcome. "Remember, Jenna?" Sebastian murmured, his hand on the small of her back, his touch feeling more like a positioning than a caress. Flawless. "Tonight we are untouchable." She nodded the baby inside her, giving a gentle kick a secret reassurance. She walked beside her husband into the heart of the magnificent home. The sound of a string quartet already drifting from the grand terrace. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes. Everything was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was, by all accounts, perfect. But as a grey bank of clouds began to mass on the distant horizon, Haley felt a shiver of unease, a premonition as dark and foreboding as the coming storm. The perfect world Sebastian had built felt impossibly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a single, malicious puff of wind. She was about to find out that the wind was already in the room, and it was wearing Victoria Beaumont's smile. The party was an exercise in calculated excess. An oyster bar featured mollusks flown in from 5 different countries. A vodka luge carved from a single block of ice into a replica of Sebastian's corporate logo was the centerpiece of the main bar. Tech billionaires mingled with European aristocrats and supermodels, laughed with grizzled hedge fund managers. Haley played her part, a gracious hostess, floating through the crowd, her hand never far from her belly. She saw Sebastian across the infinity pool, locked in conversation with Blake and Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was dazzling in a crimson dress that seemed to defy gravity. She laughed at something Sebastian said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. Haley had seen that gesture 100 times, a casual mark of territory that set her teeth on edge. She told herself it was just the paranoia of pregnancy. She turned to greet a senator from New York, discussing a recent museum gala when she felt a presence behind her. "You're glowing," Victoria purred, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Pregnancy suits you. It's so domestic." Haley forced a smile. "Thank you, Victoria. I see you're enjoying the party." "Oh, it's a Sebastian Devereaux party." "They're always legendary," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Haley from head to toe. "That's a lovely color on you. Did Sebastian pick it out?" He always had such specific tastes. The implication was clear. Another subtle jab to remind Haley of her place. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from across the sea. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds and making the paper lanterns dance violently. The sky, once a canvas of pastel sunset hues, was now a bruised purple. "Looks like we're in for a show," Victoria said with a smirk, seemingly unbothered. An hour later, the show began. The storm hit not with a gentle prelude, but with a sudden, furious onslaught. Rain came down in blinding sheets, driving the guests from the exposed terraces into the cavernous main hall of the Overlook. The string quartet was replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive crash of waves against the cliffs below. The lights flickered, casting the panicked faces of the elite in a strobe-like effect. In the ensuing chaos, Haley searched for Sebastian. She found him near the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking utterly calm. He was with Victoria again. Blake was nowhere to be seen. Seb, the staff, is trying to get everyone to the storm shelters in the guest villas. Haley said, her voice tight with anxiety. We should coordinate, he cut her off. His eyes cold and distant. Everything is under control, Haley. Go and rest. You look pale. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Hurt and confused, she began to walk away, but his next words stopped her dead. She knows, Vic. It's time. The words were a low murmur, but in a sudden lull in the storm's fury, they carried across the marble floor with perfect, devastating clarity. Haley turned back slowly. Victoria was looking at her, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. Knows what Seb, Haley asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. What's going on? Sebastian sighed, a theatrical sound of weary impatience. He took a step forward, and the small crowd that had been huddled nearby fell silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The drama of the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the walls of the Overlook. This, he said, gesturing vaguely between himself and Haley. This arrangement, it has run its course. Haley's blood ran cold. Arrangement? You mean our marriage? I mean, the charade. He corrected his voice, rising, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He was performing now. This was his stage. I needed a certain image for the Ethelred deal. A stable, traditional man. You played that part beautifully, I'll admit. A collective gasp went through the audience of his peers. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Haley felt her face flush with heat, 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her humiliation. The deal is done. Sebastian continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. My company is secure, and I no longer require the props. Props. Her voice was a choked whisper. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the life inside her. Is that what your son is to you? A prop. Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. My son? Oh, Haley, you are delightfully naive. I have my lawyers the best in the world. They've raised some very interesting questions about the timeline of your pregnancy, about your fidelity. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a lie, a monstrous, baseless lie. But he said it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the onlookers. He was poisoning the well, destroying her reputation to ensure his own clean getaway. That's not true, she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. You know that's not true. Does it matter? He shot back. I'm Sebastian Devereux. My truth is the one that gets printed. He then turned and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to his side. He held her hand up for all to see. Victoria and I are going to be together. It's been a long time coming. She understands my world. She belongs in it. Victoria looked at Haley, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had won. You will be given a severance, Sebastian said, as if firing a disloyal employee. Generous, of course. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear quietly. My jet will take you back to the mainland in the morning after the storm passes. The staff will show you to a guest room. He turned his back on her, a final, brutal act of dismissal. He had just executed her socially and emotionally in front of the most powerful people he knew. Stranded pregnant and publicly branded an unfaithful, disposable wife, Haley stood frozen in the center of the room. The lights flickered again, and then died, completely plunging the hall into darkness, save for the frantic beams of staff flashlights and the periodic terrifying flashes of lightning from outside. In that moment of absolute darkness, a tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It felt as hot as acid. The gilded cage hadn't just opened. It had been vaporized, and she was left falling with no ground in sight. The darkness was a perverse mercy. It hid the smirks, the pitying glances, the avid curiosity on the faces of the guests. A member of the staff, a young woman named Sophia, whose kindness had always seemed genuine, gently touched Haley's arm. "Ma'am, let me take you to your room. It's not safe here." Haley allowed herself to be led away, moving like a sleepwalker through the opulent halls that now felt like a mausoleum. The room they took her to was not her own. It was a sterile, impersonal guest suite at the far end of the estate, as far from Sebastian as possible. Sophia lit some candles, her expression full of a sorrow she couldn't voice. "Is there anything I can get you?" "Mrs. Devereux." The name was a slap. "Don't call me that," Haley whispered, her voice raw. "My name is Haley McClellan." Reclaiming her maiden name was the first act of defiance, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Sophia nodded and quietly left, closing the door behind her. Haley was alone with the roaring storm and the ruins of her life. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was terrified. Sebastian's lie about her fidelity wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a strategic move to disown their child, to absolve himself of all responsibility, to paint her as a gold-digging fraud. He controlled the media, the lawyers, the narrative. If she stayed, she'd be trapped in a public relations war she couldn't possibly win. He would crush her. She and her child would be footnotes in the story of his glorious rise, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She couldn't let that happen. Her child deserved more than a life lived in the shadow of Sebastian's lies. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form. Disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. He expected her to take his severance and slink away broken. He would never expect her to simply cease to exist. The storm was her cover. The chaos was her opportunity. Driven by a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, Haley stood up. She couldn't take anything that belonged to him. Not the designer clothes in the closet, not the jewels in the safe. She took off the 7-carat diamond ring he'd placed on her finger and set it on the nightstand. It felt like removing a shackle. She was wearing only the seafoam green gown, now damp and stained. It would have to do. She went to the window. It overlooked a steep garden path that led down towards a small private cove, one rarely used by guests. The rain was relentless, turning the manicured landscape into a treacherous river of mud. It was dangerous, but staying was a death sentence of a different kind. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out of the villa. The wind tore at her, plastering the thin fabric of her dress to her body. She was instantly soaked to the bone. Her hair whipped across her face, blinding her. She half ran, half slid down the muddy path, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to keep from falling. Thorns tore at her dress and her skin. The perfect paradise had become a hostile wilderness. She reached the cove. The waves were monstrous, crashing against the rocks with a terrifying power. A small boat dock used for jet skis and tenders was being battered by the surf. Tied to it was a small inflatable Zodiac boat, its motor covered with a tarp probably left by a maintenance worker who had fled for shelter. It was her only chance. Her fingers were numb with cold as she struggled with the ropes. A massive wave crashed over the dock, nearly sweeping her off her feet. She clung to her, piling her knuckles white. The baby felt like a lead weight in her belly. "We can do this," she thought, a mantra against the screaming wind. "We have to do this." Finally, the last knot gave way. She clambered into the Zodiac, her body screaming with protest. She fumbled with the tarp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She pulled the cord on the small outboard motor. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Panic began to set in. On the third pull, a wave of desperation lending her strength. The motor sputtered to life with a choked cough. She steered the small boat away from the island into the churning Black Sea. It was an act of insanity. The Zodiac was tossed about like a toy, cresting massive waves that threatened to swallow it whole. Salt spray stung her eyes, and the roar of the engine was lost in the fury of the storm. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from Sebastian, away from the life that had tried to destroy her. She didn't know how long she fought the storm. It could have been minutes or hours. Her arms ached, her body was bruised, and a chilling exhaustion was seeping into her bones. The lights of Calivigny Island were long gone. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in a world of violent water and wind. Just as she felt her strength give out, as the engine sputtered and died, a light cut through the rain. It was a beam, powerful and steady, sweeping across the waves. It found her. The beam belonged to a larger vessel, a sturdy-looking yacht that was riding out the storm in the lee of a neighboring smaller island. Men were shouting. A rope ladder was thrown down. Strong hands pulled her from the half-swamped Zodiac onto the deck of the yacht. She collapsed, shivering and incoherent, into the arms of a figure who wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She looked up into the face of an old man, with kind, concerned eyes and a shock of white hair. He was a guest from the party she vaguely recalled, an investor from a bygone era, one who had watched the evening's drama unfold with a quiet, thoughtful detachment. "You're safe now, my dear," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "My name is Desmond Wallace, and I think it's fair to say your life has just taken a rather dramatic turn. Let's get you warm, and then we can decide what comes next." As she slipped into an exhausted unconsciousness, Hayley McClellan knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, drowned in the storm. A new one, terrifying and unknown, had just begun. The next 5 years were a lifetime. Hayley awoke on Desmond Wallace's yacht, the Wanderer. Not as a victim, but as a blank slate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sea as calm as glass. Calivigny Island was a distant smudge on the horizon, a place she vowed never to see again, not as she was. Desmond Wallace was more than just a kind stranger. He was a legend in the world of old money and discreet power. A self-made shipping magnate who had cashed out decades ago, he had watched men like Sebastian Devereux, arrogant, flashy, and ultimately hollow, rise and fall like the tides. He had seen the cruelty at the party, and in Hayley he saw not a broken woman, but a core of tempered steel she didn't yet know she possessed. He made a grave error, Hayley Desmond told her over a cup of tea in his yacht's study. A room panelled in rich mahogany and lined with books. He underestimated you. Men like Devereux always do. They see a beautiful wife, not a brilliant partner. Their ego is their Achilles' heel. He offered her a choice. He could arrange for her to be safely and anonymously returned to the United States with a small trust fund to start over. Or she could stay with him, learn from him, and forge a new identity, a new life on her own terms. Revenge is a fool's game. He said, his gaze steady. But justice is the business of building a better future on the wreckage of the past. He tried to erase you. The greatest justice it is not to haunt him, but to become someone he could never imagine. Haley chose the latter. Her son was born 3 months later in a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. She named him Leo for the lion-hearted courage he had given her. Holding him for the first time, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was building a dynasty for him, a legacy free from the taint of the Devereaux name. Under Desmond's tutelage, Haley McClellan ceased to exist. In her place emerged Haley Monroe, a name chosen for its classic strength. She devoured Desmond's library, learning about global finance, sovereign debt, emerging markets, and corporate law. She had a natural aptitude for seeing patterns, a skill honed during her years studying art history, and she applied it to the complex tapestry of the financial world. Desmond treated her like the daughter he never had. He taught her how to negotiate with sharks, how to leverage debt, how to create shell corporations and offshore accounts, not for evasion, but for protection and strategic advantage. He refined her, sharpening her intellect until it was a weapon. She learned 4 languages. She traveled with him on the Wanderer, sitting in on meetings in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Monaco, a silent observer who absorbed everything. Leo grew up on the yacht, his world a shifting landscape of international ports and the unwavering love of his mother. He had her thoughtful eyes, and to Haley's secret, painful acknowledgement, Sebastian's determined chin. He was smart, resilient, and knew nothing of the father who had disowned him. His father, in every way that mattered, was the kind old man who taught him how to fish off the coast of Greece and read him stories about great explorers. When Leo was 4, Desmond's health began to fail. He had lived a full life and was ready for its final chapter. One afternoon, anchored off the coast of Croatia, he called Haley to his study. "I'm not leaving you a fortune, my dear." He said, his voice weaker now, but still clear. "I'm leaving you an arsenal. The companies, the accounts, the contacts, they are all tools. What you build with them is up to you." He passed away a week later, peacefully in his sleep. His will was simple. The bulk of his vast, labyrinthine estate was left to a charitable foundation, but a significant, strategically chosen portfolio of assets, worth nearly $1 billion if managed correctly, was left to one Haley Monroe. Along with it was a single sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter. "My dearest Haley, I hope I have given you the means to secure your and Leo's future. But I know you. You have a fire in you that peace alone will not quench. There is one piece of unfinished business. I have learned through my network that Sebastian Devereaux is selling Calivigny Island. His tech empire is over-leveraged, and he needs liquid capital. He sees the island as a monument to a past triumph. I see it as a stage. Go and claim it. Not for revenge, but to prove once and for all that the future is not written by the men who build gilded cages, but by the women who learn to fly out of them. Your friend Desmond." Reading the letter, Haley felt a chill run down her spine. The island, the site of her greatest humiliation. For 5 years, She had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, focusing only on the future. But Desmond was right. To truly be free, she had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the ghost of her past. She looked at the financial reports Desmond had left her. She saw the network of holding companies, the web of assets. She began to formulate a plan, not with the desperation of an escaped victim, but with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate raider. Sebastian Devereux thought he had destroyed Haley McClellan 5 years ago in a storm. He had no idea that he had inadvertently forged Haley Monroe in the crucible of his own cruelty. And she was coming back to collect. The sale of Calavigny Island was not a public affair. It was a quiet, discreet offering circulated among the world's ultra-elite through a handful of exclusive brokerage firms in Zurich and London. Sebastian Devereux, true to form, couldn't bear the public humiliation of a fire sale. The official narrative was that he was realigning his portfolio to focus on new philanthropic ventures. It was a lie, and everyone in his circle knew it. His tech company, Ethelred, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was hemorrhaging money. A series of disastrous product launches and a nasty patent lawsuit had eroded investor confidence. The stock was in a death spiral. Sebastian and Victoria's lavish lifestyle, once funded by soaring profits, was now financed by debt. The island was his most liquid, most valuable, non-corporate asset. He needed to sell, and he needed to sell fast. From a quiet, modern office in Geneva, Haley Monroe orchestrated her attack. She was no longer a woman in a seafoam green dress. She was a spectre in the machine, a name on a letterhead that no one could trace back to the wife Sebastian had discarded. She operated through 3 different shell corporations, registered in 3 different countries. A real estate holding firm in the Cayman Islands, a financial services company in Luxembourg, and a consulting group in Delaware. Each was a cutout, a layer of insulation between her and the final transaction. Her lead negotiator was a shrewd, silver-haired Swiss lawyer named Anton Gruber, a man who had been fiercely loyal to Desmond Wallace for 40 years. He never asked about his new client's motives. He only executed her instructions with brutal efficiency. Sebastian's asking price was $150 million. It was inflated based on what he had spent on it, not its current market value. He's sentimental, and he's desperate, Haley told Anton over a secure video call. His ego won't let him accept a low-ball offer, so we won't make one. We will make him feel like he's winning right up until the end. Their first move was to create a competitor. Haley used the Delaware Corporation to put in a deliberately clumsy low offer of $90 million, leaking it to a financial gossip blog. The story framed it as an insult, a sign of Devereux's fallen status. Sebastian, predictably, was enraged. He publicly rejected the offer, his pride forcing him to hold firm on his price. That was when Anton Gruber, representing the Luxembourg firm Orion Capital, entered the picture. He approached Sebastian's brokers with a much more serious offer of $125 million. He was professional, courteous, and projected an air of immense old-world wealth. After the insult of the first bid, Sebastian saw Orion Capital as a serious, respectable buyer. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Sebastian, squeezed by his creditors, pushed for a higher price. Haley, through Anton, held firm. She knew Sebastian's quarterly earnings report was due to be released, and she had done her homework. It was going to be a bloodbath. The day the disastrous report was published, Ethelred stock plunged another 30%. Sebastian's bankers were calling. The pressure was immense. That same afternoon, Anton received a call. Sebastian would accept the $125 million, but he had one condition: a fast, all-cash closing in under a week, with no contingencies. It was a move designed to weed out anyone who didn't have immediate access to that kind of capital. "He is testing us," Anton told Haley. "He believes no one can move that quickly." "He's right," Haley said with a thin smile. "No one can. But we can." She initiated a complex series of wire transfers, moving funds from various accounts Desmond had left, her routing them through the Cayman Islands holding company, and finally consolidating them in an escrow account managed by Orion Capital in Zurich. It was a symphony of international finance, conducted flawlessly. 5 days later, the deal was ready to close. The final contracts were to be signed. The buyer was listed as Kalivigny Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Orion Capital. The signatory for the buyer was Anton Gruber. Haley's name was nowhere on the documents. From her office in Geneva, she watched a live feed from the closing room in Zurich. She saw Sebastian Devereux on the screen, looking older and more strained than she remembered. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle facade. Victoria was not with him. He signed the documents with a flourish of his pen, a man trying to pretend he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. Once his signature was on the page, Anton signed for the buyer. A lawyer nodded. The deal was done. The island was hers. Haley felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound quiet and deeply satisfying sense of completion. It was a transaction. A problem had been solved. A debt had been settled. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at Lake Geneva. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to prepare the stage. She picked up her phone and dialed her new estate manager, a woman hand-picked for her discretion and impeccable taste. "Good morning, Catherine Haley," said her voice, calm and steady. "We can now begin the renovations on the island. I have the guest list for the grand reopening party. I want the invitations sent out by the end of the week. Oh, and Catherine. The new owner wishes to remain anonymous for now. All correspondence should be from GM Enterprises." She hung up the phone. GM Haley Monroe, a name Sebastian Devereux would not recognize. But soon he would. He and everyone else who had watched her fall would be invited back to the scene of the crime. Only this time she wouldn't be the spectacle. She would be the architect. The invitation arrived in a world that had moved on. 5 years is an eternity in the sphere of the ultra-rich. Fortunes are made. Empires crumble. Alliances shift. For Sebastian and Victoria Devereux. The past 5 years had been a slow, grinding descent. The sale of the island had provided a temporary reprieve, but it was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. Ethelred was a shadow of its former self, propped up by risky loans and the sheer force of Sebastian's denial. Their social standing, once unassailable, had become precarious. They were no longer the power couple everyone clamored to be near. They were the couple people whispered about their troubles a source of delicious gossip. Their marriage, born of ambition and betrayal, had curdled into a partnership of mutual resentment, held together only by a shared fear of losing their status. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a private courier. It was a heavy, cream-colored card, thick as a book cover, with minimalist, embossed gold lettering. There was no gaudy crest, no ostentatious design. Its power lay in its understated elegance. GM Enterprises cordially invites you to celebrate the reawakening of Kalivigny Island. A weekend of tranquility and new beginnings. The date was set for a month away. The details were sparse, promising private jet transport from select global capitals and an experience of unparalleled bespoke luxury. The host was identified only as the island's new anonymous owner. Victoria, her face a carefully maintained mask of cosmetic enhancements, turned the card over in her hands. GM Enterprises, who the hell is that? Must be some new Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince. Tacky to be so mysterious. Sebastian, however, felt a flicker of something else. Not excitement, but a gnawing curiosity mixed with the bitter tang of loss. Everyone is talking about it, he said, scrolling through his phone. The entire guest list from that night. They all got at one. It's a power play. The new owner is making a statement inviting the old king's court to see the new regime. So we're not going, Victoria stated flatly. The island held nothing but sour memories for her, now a monument to a victory that had ultimately felt hollow. We have to go, Sebastian countered, his voice sharp. Not going would be an admission of defeat. It would be telling the world that we can't stand to see someone else own our old property. It would be weak. We will go, we will smile, we will praise the new owner's taste, and we will act as if selling that rock was the smartest decision we ever made. We have to maintain appearances, Victoria. It's all we have left. And so they accepted, as did everyone else. The mystery was too tantalizing to ignore. For the next month, the sole topic of conversation in their elite circles was the identity of GM. On the appointed day, Sebastian and Victoria boarded a chartered jet, a far cry from their old G650. The other passengers were familiar faces from their past, the same hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls. But the atmosphere was different. The fawning respect they once commanded was gone, replaced by a polite, cool distance. They were no longer the sun around which these people orbited. They were just two more guests. As the jet descended towards the familiar airstrip, Sebastian felt a pit in his stomach. The island looked different, more lush. The main residence, the overlook, had been subtly altered. The stark modernist lines he had favored were softened by cascades of vibrant bougainvillea. The architecture was the same, but the soul of the place felt new. They were greeted not by staff in starchy formal uniforms, but by hosts in elegant flowing linen. The atmosphere was not one of opulent servitude, but of relaxed, confident hospitality. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi, but the sophisticated ambient tones of a modern electronic composer. Their bags were whisked away to their suite, a guest villa not the owner's residence they had once occupied. It was the very same suite where Haley had been sent after her public humiliation. The irony was so thick it was suffocating, though Sebastian was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, the welcome reception was held on the main terrace. It mirrored the party from 5 years ago, yet it was an inversion of it. The garish ice sculpture was gone, replaced by a stunning piece of modern art. The food was not a buffet of excess, but a curated selection of exquisite, locally sourced tapas. Everything was better, more tasteful, more confident, more powerful. Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the work of some new money brute. This was the work of someone with impeccable taste and a deep understanding of psychology. Someone who knew exactly what this place once represented and was systematically dismantling it. He and Victoria mingled, putting on their brave faces, but the whispers were everywhere. "Who is GM? Have you seen the new art collection? I heard they bought the island for cash, no financing." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests, A woman, the estate manager Catherine, stepped onto a small, discreet stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome," she said, her voice amplified just enough to be heard over the gentle music. "On behalf of our host, we are so thrilled you could join us for this special weekend." In a few moments, the owner of this island, the visionary behind GM Enterprises, would like to say a few words. A buzz of anticipation went through the crowd. Everyone craned their necks, looking towards the main entrance of the villa. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. He needed to see the person who had done this, the person who had bought his past and so effortlessly improved upon it. The music softened. The lights on the terrace dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the empty stage. The moment was pregnant with expectation, and from the shadows of the grand archway, a figure emerged. A woman. She was tall and poised, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut evening gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. It was a face sculpted by strength, intelligence, and an unshakable, chilling calm. A collective audible gasp rippled through the guests. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone terrace. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stopped. He was looking at a ghost. But she was not a ghost. She was real. It was Haley. She walked to the center of the stage, her movements possessing a liquid grace that was utterly captivating. The sapphire dress, a column of midnight silk, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making her the undeniable focal point of the entire terrace. She didn't look angry or triumphant or vengeful. She looked serene, a queen, taking her place on her throne not by conquest but by divine right. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back radiating a confidence that was so absolute it felt like a physical force. This was not the gentle, accommodating Haley they remembered. This was a woman forged in a fire they couldn't possibly comprehend. A staff member offered her a microphone, but she waited a long, deliberate moment before taking it, letting the silence and the crushing weight of the crowd's shock settle over the terrace. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the sea of stunned, upturned faces. They passed over tech moguls who had once ignored her and socialites who had whispered about her. Finally, her gaze landed on Sebastian and Victoria. She held their stare for a single protracted heartbeat, a moment stretched into an eternity. In that silent, chilling acknowledgement, they knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. This was an appointment, an execution meticulously planned and 5 years in the making. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Beside her, Sebastian stood utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief carved from ice. The man who always had a plan, always had an angle, was completely, terrifyingly adrift. His mind, usually a supersonic calculator of risk and opportunity, was blank with static. Impossible. It's not her. It's a trick, a ghost. But his heart, hammering against his ribs, knew the truth. "Welcome back to Calavigny Island," Haley finally said. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant tone he remembered. It was richer, deeper, and resonated with an unshakable authority that commanded the attention of every person present. "I see some familiar faces. It's been 5 years. A great deal can change in 5 years." She paused, allowing the profound understatement to land with the force of a physical blow. The whispers began to erupt, a panicked, sibilant sound like dry leaves, skittering across pavement. It's her. My God. It's actually her. How is this possible? Where did she get the money? Sebastian could feel the collective gaze of the crowd shift, flickering between the woman on the stage and him. He was no longer a guest. He was part of the spectacle. The other half of a story, whose ending he had written long ago, only to find the protagonist had returned to pen a final, brutal chapter. Some of you may remember me, she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of supreme, untouchable control, though perhaps in a different context. The last time we were all gathered here on a rather stormy evening, I was the wife of the host. Tonight, she let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool. I am simply the host. The implication was a thunderclap. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. The wine glass, forgotten in her hand, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter on the stone terrace. It landed on the manicured lawn, just beside it, with a dull, muffled thud, a sound of anticlimax that was somehow more unnerving than a crash. I understand there is some curiosity, Haley said, her voice smoothly overriding the rising clamor. Let me be clear. This weekend is not about dwelling on the past. It is about building the future. It is about celebrating new beginnings. Her eyes swept the horizon towards the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. This island, once a symbol of brittle, fleeting power, a monument to an ego, is being reborn. It will now be the headquarters for my foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to supporting emerging artists and entrepreneurs who value creativity over currency. She was rewriting history, erasing his legacy with a few effortless sentences and replacing it with her own nobler vision. Every word was a calculated demolition of the world he had built. He had used the island to project strength. She was using it to project purpose. The comparison was devastating, and he could feel the judgment of his peers turning on him. However, she added, and her tone shifted, the philanthropic warmth evaporating, replaced by the chilling precision of a boardroom executioner. New beginnings sometimes require the clearing of old debts, and in the world of business, as we all know, all debts must eventually be paid. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Sebastian's. He felt pinned by her gaze, a specimen under a microscope. For instance, Haley said, her voice now a clinical, dispassionate instrument. Some of you here tonight are investors in a company called Ethelred. My advice as a courtesy from your host would be to divest immediately. Their recent financing, the series of high-risk loans that have been keeping them afloat for the past 6 months, were not from a traditional banking institution. They were extended by a private equity firm, a rather aggressive firm named Orion Capital. A new wave of murmurs, this time laced with genuine financial panic, rippled through the guests. Several people, no longer trying to be discreet, pulled out their phones and began typing furiously. The name Orion Capital meant nothing to them, but the warning from the woman who clearly held all the cards was enough. But to Sebastian, the name was a death knell. Orion Capital was his lifeline, his secret savior, the anonymous entity that had given him the capital to stave off ruin. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in his stomach as he began to connect the impossible dots. Haley let him squirm in that silent horror for a moment, before continuing. Orion Capital, as of last week, was acquired in a rather swift, hostile takeover by my own holding company, which means, Sebastian, that the 9-figure debt you thought you owed to a stranger you now owe to me." The crowd gasped as one. This was beyond revenge. This was a strategic masterwork of such breathtaking cruelty that it bordered on art. "I'm calling in the loan," she stated as simply as if she were ordering a coffee. "All of it. The covenants in your agreement are rather strict, as desperate men tend to overlook the fine print. I believe the default clause can be triggered by me at my sole discretion, and I am exercising that discretion. Effective tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Zurich time, your company will be in receivership. My people will be at your offices to oversee the liquidation." Sebastian actually staggered a step back, his hand flying to a nearby pillar for support. This was it. The end. Not just failure, but total annihilation delivered publicly by the woman he had tried to erase. Haley's gaze then shifted with chilling nonchalance to Victoria. "And Victoria, your new lifestyle brand, a noble effort to remain relevant. Unfortunately, your primary seed investor, a small venture capital fund called Beaumont Ventures, has also just been acquired by a subsidiary of GM Enterprises. We will be re-evaluating all current investments, and I'm afraid a vanity project with no discernible path to profitability does not align with our portfolio strategy. Your funding will be terminated effective immediately." If Sebastian's ruin was a cannon blast, Victoria's was the silent, deadly slice of a stiletto. Her carefully constructed world of influence and appearances evaporated in an instant. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask of shock and hatred. Having delivered her financial death blows, Haley's expression softened, but it was a change that brought no comfort. It was the prelude to the final, most personal devastation. But as I said, she repeated her voice now imbued with a quiet power. "Tonight is about the future." From the shadows at the side of the stage, a door to the main residence opened. The estate manager, Catherine, emerged holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 5. He was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked with a child's unself-conscious curiosity, his eyes taking in the strange crowd. He walked straight to Haley, who knelt down, her entire being softening as she wrapped a protective arm around him. "I would like you all to meet the true owner of this island's future," she said, her voice thick with a love that was a tangible, fiercely protective force. "This is my son, Leo." Leo looked out at the crowd, his gaze unafraid. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes, but everything else, the dark, unruly hair, the strong set of his jaw, the determined shape of his chin, was pure, undiluted Devereaux. He was the spitting image of a younger, uncorrupted Sebastian. The paternity he had so publicly and callously questioned 5 years ago was now presented as irrefutable evidence to the very same jury that had witnessed his crime. The silence on the terrace was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. The social and emotional checkmate was complete. Every lie Sebastian had ever told about her, about their child, was laid bare for all to see. Haley stood up, holding her son's hand firmly in hers. She didn't spare another glance for the wreckage she had wrought. She didn't need to gloat or scream. Her victory was in her calm, in her control, in the simple, undeniable fact that she was standing there, whole and powerful with her son by her side. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and there was nothing in her eyes. Not hatred, not pity, not even the memory of love. It was the flat, dismissive look one gives to a piece of furniture, to something utterly irrelevant that is about to be removed. "Enjoy the party," she said to the assembled guests, her voice once again the gracious host. Then she turned her back on her former husband, on the woman who had replaced her, and on the entire life that had almost destroyed her. She walked off the stage with her son, disappearing back into the magnificent home that was now hers, leaving everyone else standing in the beautiful, perfect, and utterly ruthless world she had created. The party's ambient music swelled to fill the silence, but it couldn't hide the sound of a world ending for the two figures left standing alone in the center of it all. That night, Haley Monroe didn't just reclaim her name. She forged a new legend. Her story became a whisper, then a roar in the circles of the powerful, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the castles you build, but the ashes you rise from. She transformed Kalavinni Island from a monument of ego into a beacon of hope, proving that the deepest betrayals can fuel the most incredible transformations. Her revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, undeniable hum of a new empire being built upon the foundations of an old one's collapse. She became the architect of her own destiny, the queen of her own island, and a mother who showed her son that a person's worth is not determined by who tried to break them, but by how they choose to rebuild. What did you think of Haley's ultimate comeback? Was her justice served cold, or was it just right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a moment where you had to rise from the ashes, share your story of strength. We are inspired by resilience. For more stories of incredible twists and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to you. The sound that broke Cressida Bishop's life wasn't a scream, but the delicate shatter of a champagne flute on marble. It was her husband's gala, a celebration of his fashion empire, and she stood frozen 5 months pregnant, watching him kiss another woman under the glare of a crystal chandelier. The woman was his new star designer, but it wasn't the kiss that shattered her. It was his words when he finally saw her. He didn't look guilty, just annoyed. "Darling." He sighed, a whisper of pure venom. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just business. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby." Her world didn't just crack. It atomized. That was the night she walked out with nothing but a broken heart and a life growing inside her, completely unaware that the key to his entire kingdom was already in her hands. Life in the Montclair penthouse was an exercise in curated perfection, from the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline like a living masterpiece to the stark white orchids that were replaced every 3 days. Everything was designed to be beautiful, flawless, and untouchable. Cressida, or Cress as she preferred, often felt like just another one of those exquisite, fragile objects. Her husband, Lucius Montclair, was the architect of this world. He was the charismatic, razor-sharp CEO of Montclair Couture, an empire built on the dazzling, cutthroat world of high fashion. To the public, he was a visionary. To his board, a titan. To Cress, he was the man who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of ambition and charm, who saw her a young, promising textile designer and decided she would be his. Their meeting had been a fairy tale. She was interning at a small artisanal fabric mill when he'd come scouting for new materials. He was captivated not by her designs, which he called charming but provincial. But by her quiet grace and the way she seemed to complement his own dazzling persona, he pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate acquisition. Within 6 months, they were married. Cress, swept away by the grandeur and the intensity of his affection, believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She soon learned, however, that being Mrs. Montclair meant her own ambitions were expected to be packed away like last season's collection. Her design sketchbook, once filled with vibrant, innovative patterns, gathered dust on a shelf in her cavernous walk-in closet. When she tried to show him her work, he would pat her hand indulgently. "That's lovely, my dear," he'd say, his eyes already on his phone. "But you have a much more important role now. You're the face of my home, the hostess of my parties. Leave the hard work to me." The penthouse, for all its beauty, became her gilded cage. Her days were a structured sequence of appointments, with event planners, nutritionists, and personal trainers, all meticulously scheduled by Lucius's assistant. Her friends were Lucius's friends, wives of bankers and executives, who spoke of charity galas and summering in the Hamptons, their conversations as sterile and polished as the marble floors beneath their feet. Cress felt a part of herself, the creative, passionate part, slowly suffocating. The news of her pregnancy should have been a joyous occasion, a fresh start. When she told Lucius, placing the positive test on his polished mahogany desk, he looked up from a quarterly report, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He simply nodded slowly. "Good," he said, as if she had just successfully closed a deal. "A son, I hope. An heir is good for the brand's image. Legacy." His reaction was a cold splash of water, but Cress tried to rationalize it. He was a busy man, always thinking about the business. She threw herself into the pregnancy, hoping the shared experience of creating a life would bridge the growing chasm between them. She started sketching again this time, designs for baby clothes using soft organic fabrics. She imagined a small independent line, something of her own. One evening, brimming with a rare surge of confidence, she laid out her sketches and business proposal on the dining room table before he got home. She had worked on it for weeks, researching suppliers, costing out materials, and even creating a brand name, Bishop's Weave, a nod to her family name and her grandfather who had been a tailor. Lucius walked in, loosening his tie, his face tight with the stress of the day. He glanced at the papers scattered across the table, and his lip curled into a faint sneer. "What's all this? It's my idea," Cress began, her voice trembling slightly. "A luxury baby clothing line. The market is strong, and I have a unique perspective on sustainable fabrics." He picked up a sketch of a tiny, hand-stitched romper. He held it for a moment before letting it drop back onto the table. "Cressida, we've discussed this. Your hobby is charming, but it's not a business. Montclair Couture deals in power and desire, not baby clothes. It would dilute the brand." "It wouldn't be part of Montclair Couture," she insisted, her heart sinking. "It would be mine, something I built." He laughed, then a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Built, darling, you have no idea what it takes to build something. You live in a world I built for you. Your job is to be here, to be beautiful, and soon to be a mother. That should be enough for you. Now let's clear this away. We have the Future of Fashion Gala tomorrow night, and I need you to look rested." The finality in his tone was absolute. He didn't see her. He saw a function, a role to be played. The dismissal of her dream of her very identity beyond being his wife was more painful than any overt act of cruelty. As she gathered her sketches, Her hands shaking, she felt the first true deep crack appear in the flawless facade of her life. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage, and for the first time, she was rattling the bars, wondering if she had the strength to break them. The gala meant to be a celebration of his success now loomed like a final judgment on her own life's failures. The future of Fashion Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, and Lucius Montclair was its undisputed king. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters weaved through the throngs with trays of shimmering champagne, and the air hummed with the electric buzz of power money and influence. Cress felt a familiar sense of detachment as she stood by Lucius's side, a practiced smile fixed on her face. She wore a deep emerald gown of Montclair silk, a dress chosen for her, designed to perfectly accommodate her 5-month baby bump, while still exuding effortless elegance. To the outside world, she was the picture of a serene, glowing mother-to-be, the perfect consort to the man of the hour. Inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Lucius's dismissal of her business idea the night before had left a hollow ache in her chest that no amount of couture could cover. Lucius was in his element, holding court, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He accepted congratulations, his laughter booming his charisma, a tangible force field. But his eyes kept darting across the room, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place, anticipation, perhaps in their depths. Lucius, darling, a triumph as always, a gushing socialite, air-kissed them both. We do what we can, Brenda, Lucius replied with a practiced, self-deprecating charm. But the real future of this house is standing right over there. He gestured towards the stage, where a willowy woman with fire-red hair and a predatory smile was speaking to a cluster of fashion journalists. This was Giselle Dubois, Montclair Couture's new head designer, poached from a rival Parisian house with an astronomical salary. She was Lucius's latest, most celebrated acquisition, hailed as a design prodigy who would propel the brand into the stratosphere. Cress had met Giselle only once, a brief, chilly introduction, where the designer's eyes had swept over Cress with a look of utter disinterest, as if she were a piece of outdated furniture. Now, watching her command the room, Cress felt a prickle of unease. I need to go speak with the press, darling, Lucius said, squeezing her arm. Mingle. Look radiant. He left her side, and she felt instantly adrift. She made her way through the crowd, nodding and smiling, her mind 1,000,000 miles away. She found a quiet alcove near a balcony, seeking a moment of respite. The cool night air was a relief. From her vantage point, she could see most of the ballroom. She saw Lucius make his way over to Giselle. He didn't join the press circle. Instead, he drew Giselle away towards a shadowed corridor behind a large floral arrangement. Cress's unease sharpened into a cold dread. She told herself she was being paranoid hormonal, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, she slipped out of the alcove and moved towards the corridor, keeping to the edges of the room. The thumping bass of the music masked her footsteps. As she neared the floral display, she could hear their voices low and intimate. The collection is a masterpiece, but you, my dear, are the true work of art. Lucius was saying, his voice a low purr she hadn't heard him use with her in years. And you are the patron who knows how to display it. Giselle's throaty laugh replied, Is your lovely little incubator enjoying the party? The casual cruelty of the word incubator struck Cress with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. She plays her part, Lucius said dismissively. She's content, as long as she has her charities and her... Nesting instincts, she's perfectly manageable. Cress peeked through a gap in the orchids. She saw Lucius's hand slide from Giselle's waist to cup her face. He leaned in and kissed her, not a peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss, filled with a passion Cress had only ever dreamed of. Time seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. In that moment, Cress's world, already cracked, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the complete and utter negation of her existence. She was a part, a manageable incubator. Her love, her pregnancy, their life together, it was all a sham, a carefully managed piece of brand strategy. She stumbled back, knocking a waiter's tray. A single champagne flute teetered and then fell shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of her own heart. The sound made them both turn. Lucius's eyes widened not with guilt or remorse, but with pure, unadulterated annoyance. He strode out of the corridor, Giselle a smug shadow behind him. "Cressida," he said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes cold as ice. "What are you doing, skulking in the corners?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. "I saw you, Lucius." He glanced at the onlookers who were beginning to stare, his face hardening into a mask of public control. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and steered her towards a side exit. "Don't you dare make a scene here," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "You will ruin everything." "You ruined everything." She finally choked out the words, raw and ragged. "Our marriage, our baby." They were in a deserted hallway now. He finally let her go, pushing her against the wall. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and she saw nothing but contempt. "Our baby," he scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's a convenient distraction for you, isn't it? Something to keep you busy. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby." The words from the opening hook, the final fatal blow. He had taken the one pure, precious thing in her life, their unborn child, and twisted it into another insult, another way to diminish her. Something inside Cress snapped. The grief, the shock, the years of quiet subservience, it all coalesced into a single clarifying moment of cold, hard certainty. She looked him dead in the eye, her tears suddenly gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I should focus, but not on the baby, on getting as far away from you as I possibly can." Before he could react, she turned and walked away. Not back to the party, but down the hall past the kitchens and out a service exit into the cold night air. The city lights blurred as she walked a taxi's headlights, cutting through the darkness. She didn't look back. She left behind the diamonds, the silk gown, the penthouse, the lies. She walked out with nothing but the clothes on her back, a life growing inside her, and the chilling echo of her husband's final unforgivable words. The shattering was complete. Now all that was left were the ruins. The cold night air hit Cress like a slap, a brutal awakening from the suffocating warmth of the gala. The emerald silk gown felt like a costume from another life, thin and useless against the city's unforgiving chill. Her manicured hands, accustomed to the soft leather of a chauffeured car, fumbled in her tiny clutch. She had her phone, a lipstick, and a single credit card, a supplementary card on Lucius's account, which she knew would be cancelled by morning. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. She was pregnant alone and effectively homeless on a downtown street corner. The towering skyscrapers, that once represented a life of luxury, now seemed to mock her, their glittering facades cold and indifferent. For a terrifying moment, she had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and the friends she'd cultivated over the past few years were Lucius's allies, their loyalty bought and paid for by his influence. Then a memory surfaced, a beacon in the storm. Mrs. Peterson. Martha Peterson was her landlady from college, a kind, no-nonsense widow who rented out rooms in her modest but impeccably kept brownstone in a quiet, older part of the city. Cress had kept in touch, sending a Christmas card every year, a small link to a life that was truly her own. With trembling fingers, she found the number and called. "Cressida? Dear, is that you? It's past midnight. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Peterson's voice was warm but laced with concern. A sob escaped Cress's lips, the first sound she'd made since leaving the hotel. "No," she whispered the word, cracking. "Nothing is all right. Can I come over? I have nowhere else to go." There was no hesitation. "Of course, dear. The kettle's always on. Come home." Home. The word was a balm to her shattered soul. A taxi ride across the city felt like a journey across worlds. She left the sleek, modern steel and glass of Lucius's district and entered a neighborhood of brick buildings, fire escapes and laundromats that glowed warmly in the dark. Mrs. Peterson opened the door before Cress even knocked. She was a small, sturdy woman with kind eyes and hair the color of steel wool. She took one look at Cress's tear-streaked face and the ridiculously opulent gown and simply opened her arms. Cress collapsed into her embrace, the raw, unfiltered grief she'd been suppressing, finally erupting in a storm of sobs. Mrs. Peterson led her inside, sat her down at the worn oak kitchen table, and wrapped a thick knitted afghan around her shoulders. She placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in Cress's hands and sat opposite her, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. Over the next hour, the whole sordid story came pouring out, the dismissiveness, the affair with Giselle, the final cruel words about the baby. Mrs. Peterson listened without judgment, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a quiet, simmering anger on Cress's behalf. "That man," she said, finally, her voice firm, "is a fool of the highest order. To throw away a diamond because he's too busy admiring cheap glass." That night, Cress slept in the small attic room she had rented as a student, the scent of lavender and old books a comforting lullaby. The mattress was lumpy. The sheets were faded cotton, not Egyptian, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. The next few weeks were a brutal adjustment. The first thing she did was take the taxi to a consignment shop and sell the emerald gown and the diamond earrings she was wearing. The money was a pittance compared to their worth, but it was hers. It was enough for a few weeks' rent to Mrs. Peterson, who initially refused, but relented when Cress insisted a simple wardrobe of second-hand clothes and groceries. The whiplash of her new reality was staggering. One day she was attending fittings for custom maternity wear. The next she was counting change to see if she could afford organic milk. The nausea of her first trimester returned with a vengeance amplified by stress and a diet that no longer included chef-prepared, nutrient-balanced meals. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. Some days the weight of her grief and fear was so heavy she could barely get out of bed. She would lie there, one hand on her growing belly, and weep for the future she had lost, and for the child who would be born into this chaos. Lucius made no attempt to contact her. The credit card was cancelled within hours, as she'd predicted. A week later, a curt email from his lawyer arrived informing her that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that given the circumstances of her desertion, she should not expect a generous settlement. There was no mention of the baby. It was as if she and their child had been surgically excised from his life. The cold corporate cruelty of it all reignited a spark of anger within her. It was a small spark, but in the darkness of her despair, it was enough to see by. Mrs. Peterson was her rock. She would leave trays of toast and soup outside Cress's door, never pushing, but always present. She'd coax her out for walks in the local park, encouraging her to feel the sun on her face. "One foot in front of the other, dear," she'd say. "That's all anyone can do." Slowly, painfully, Cress began to piece herself back together. The storm was still raging, but she was no longer adrift. She was learning to build a raft. She started sketching again, not for a business, but for herself. She drew the faces she saw in the park, the intricate patterns of leaves on the sidewalk, the way the light hit the brick buildings at sunset. It was a way to reclaim a part of herself that Lucius had tried to extinguish. She was no longer Cressida Montclair, the millionaire's wife. She was Cress Bishop, a designer, a survivor, and a mother-to-be. And in the quiet anonymity of her new life that felt like a promotion, months bled into one another. The city transitioned from the crispness of late autumn to the deep freeze of winter. Cress's belly grew round and full, a constant living reminder of the new life she was now solely responsible for. The sharp, acute pain of Lucius's betrayal had dulled into a persistent heavy ache, but her focus had shifted. Her survival and the well-being of her baby became her entire world. She found a quiet rhythm in her life with Mrs. Peterson. She helped with chores around the house. Her sketches began to fill a new portfolio, and she even took on some small freelance jobs designing logos and brochures for local businesses. The pay was meager, but the sense of accomplishment was immeasurable. Each dollar she earned was a brick in the foundation of her new independent life. One particularly cold and snowy afternoon, with the city hushed under a blanket of white, Mrs. Peterson asked for her help clearing out some old boxes from a storage closet. "My old bones aren't what they used to be," she said with a smile. Amongst the dusty relics of a life well lived, Cress found a small wooden trunk tucked away in a corner. It was hers. Her mother had sent it to Mrs. Peterson for safekeeping when Cress had first moved in with Lucius, filled with childhood mementos and things that didn't fit into the sterile minimalism of the penthouse. She had completely forgotten about it. Curious, she pried open the lid. Inside were photo albums, her old art school projects, and a collection of her grandfather's things. Robert Bishop had been a master tailor, a quiet, meticulous man who had passed away when Cress was in her late teens. He had been her first mentor, the one who taught her about the feel of different fabrics, the importance of a perfect stitch, the soul that could be woven into a garment. She lifted out his old sewing kit, the heavy shears he used to cut cloth, and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was not jewelry, but a single ornate old-fashioned brass key and a thick sealed envelope made of heavy parchment. Her name, Cressida, was written on the front in her grandfather's elegant looping script. Her heart pounded as she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was dated a week before he passed away. "My dearest Cressida, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope that you have found happiness in your life. I am writing to you about a part of my past I rarely spoke of. Long before I was a simple neighborhood tailor, I was a partner in a business. I was the craftsman, the artist. My partner was the salesman, the visionary. Together we founded a small but exceptional textile company called Ariadne Weavers. We created fabrics of unparalleled quality. Over time, my partner, a man named Jonathan Montclair, wanted to expand into fashion, into a world of glamour and branding that held little appeal for me. We had different visions. I wanted to create art. He wanted to build an empire. We parted ways amicably. I sold him my operational shares, but I kept my founding stake, a silent, controlling interest in the parent company we had established. I had no interest in boardrooms or stock markets, but I wanted to ensure the legacy of our quality was protected. I put these shares into a blind trust for you, my only grandchild. The company evolved, and Ariadne Weavers became the foundation of what you now likely know as Montclair Couture. Jonathan's son, and perhaps his grandson, may have forgotten that the roots of their grand empire lie in the hands of a quiet tailor. This key will open a safe deposit box at the Sterling National Bank downtown. Inside you will find the trust documents. They are structured to give you full control upon your 30th birthday, or under a force majeure clause, which can be enacted in the event of significant personal distress or upheaval. My lawyer, a brilliant man named David Chen, holds the second key and the full instructions. His card is enclosed. This is your legacy, Cressida. Not a weapon, but a shield. It is the fruit of my life's work. Use it to protect yourself, to build something beautiful and true, and to ensure that true craftsmanship is never sacrificed for the sake of empty glamour. Be happy, my dear girl. With all my love. Grandfather Robert Cress read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking so violently the parchment rattled. Montclair Couture, Lucius's company. Her grandfather was the silent founder. It seemed impossible, a fantasy. She stared at the heavy brass key in her palm. It felt impossibly real. A shield, he had called it. Right now, she needed a shield more than anything. The next morning, driven by a dizzying mix of hope and disbelief, she called the number on the enclosed business card. A calm, professional voice answered. Law offices of Chen and Associates. My name is Cressida Bishop, she said, her own voice barely a whisper. I was told to contact a Mr. David Chen. It's regarding my grandfather, Robert Bishop. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Chen has been expecting your call for a very long time, the voice replied. Can you come in this afternoon? The law office was in a sleek, modern building, a world away from Mrs. Peterson's cozy brownstone. But Cress walked in not as a supplicant, but as a woman on a mission. David Chen was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He greeted her not with pity, but with a deep professional respect. He already had his key. Together they went to the bank. The safe deposit box was opened, and inside, nestled in a leather-bound folio, were the documents. As Mr. Chen explained the complex legal language, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Her grandfather hadn't just left her some stock. He had left her a 52% controlling interest in the holding company that owned Montclair Couture and all its assets. It was an ironclad, unassailable majority stake. Because Lucius's father had diluted his own shares over the years to fund acquisitions and pay off debts, Lucius's own portion, which he believed gave him ultimate control, was only around 35%. He was a king ruling a kingdom he didn't actually own. Your grandfather's force majeure clause is quite clear. Mr. Chen explained, his voice calm and steady. as he looked at the heavily pregnant, determined woman before him. Your current circumstances, divorce, financial abandonment, more than satisfy the conditions. The trust is now yours to command. The question is, Ms. Bishop, what do you want to do with it? Cress looked down at the documents at her grandfather's name, entwined with the Montclairs. She thought of Lucius's sneering face, of Giselle's cruel nickname for her, of the way her dreams had been casually crushed. But more than that, she thought of her grandfather's words, "Build something beautiful and true." A slow, determined smile spread across her face. The storm hadn't broken her. It had washed away the debris and revealed the foundation that had been there all along. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I want to call a meeting, an extraordinary general meeting of the shareholders, and I want to introduce them to their new majority owner." The discovery of her inheritance didn't trigger an immediate, vengeful charge. Instead, it ignited a slow, deliberate fire within Cress. The months of helplessness and fear were burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. She was no longer a victim adrift in a storm. She was the storm itself, gathering strength, waiting for the perfect moment to make landfall. David Chen became her general, her strategist. They met not in his gleaming corporate office, but in the quiet, sunlit parlor of Mrs. Peterson's brownstone, a war room hidden in plain sight. Over cups of tea and plates of biscuits, they pored over decades of company financials, board meeting minutes, and shareholder reports. Cress wasn't just claiming an inheritance. She was earning it. She devoured every document, learning the intricate dance of corporate governance, finance, and law. She discovered the company's weaknesses, its strengths, and most importantly, the rot that had set in under Lucius's leadership. While Montclair Couture's public image was stronger than ever, thanks to Giselle's flashy, critically acclaimed but astronomically expensive new collection, the company's finances told a different story. Lucius was leveraging assets to fund lavish marketing campaigns and his own exorbitant lifestyle. He had fired dozens of long-serving loyal employees, master tailors, pattern makers, and textile experts who had been with the company for decades, some since her grandfather's era, replacing them with cheaper, less experienced labor to cut costs. He was sacrificing the very soul of the company, its commitment to quality craftsmanship, for short-term buzz and profit. He was turning her grandfather's legacy into a hollow, gilded shell. "He's arrogant," David Chen observed one afternoon, tapping a finger on a damning quarterly report. "He believes he's untouchable. That's our greatest advantage. He won't see us coming." Their plan, which Cress privately named the Phoenix Agenda, was twofold. First, they needed to consolidate her power silently. While her 52% stake gave her control, David advised acquiring a few more percentage points on the open market through a proxy buyer. This would not only fortify her position, but also create a small stir, a tremor that might put Lucius on edge, but wouldn't reveal the true source of the earthquake to come. "We make him look for a threat from a rival corporation or a hedge fund," David explained. "He'll be looking in the wrong direction, scanning the horizon for battleships, while our submarine glides right underneath him." Second, Cress needed to be ready. It wasn't enough to be the owner. She had to be the leader. She spent her days studying and her nights sketching. But now her designs weren't for a quaint baby line. They were for a new Montclair Couture, a collection that honored her grandfather's commitment to fabric and form, but was infused with a bold, modern vision. It was a vision of strength, resilience, and quiet power. Everything she herself was becoming. As her due date approached, her resolve only hardened. The kicks and flutters in her womb were a constant reminder of what she was fighting for. Not just for herself, but for her child's future. A future free from the shadow of a man like Lucius Montclair. Meanwhile, Lucius remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware. Cress's quiet disappearance from his life was to him a problem solved. He was seen at every party, every opening with the triumphant Giselle Dubois on his arm. The press hailed them as the new power couple of fashion. In a widely circulated interview, Lucius was asked about his recent divorce. "Sometimes people grow in different directions," he'd said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "My focus has always been, and will always be, on the future of this company. I require a partner who shares that vision, not one who is distracted by domestic trivialities." The words relayed to Cress by David were like fuel on the fire. Domestic trivialities. He was talking about their child. A week before the annual shareholders' meeting, Cress gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace. Holding her daughter in her arms in the quiet hospital room, looking into her tiny, perfect face, Cress knew every fear, every tear, every moment of struggle had been worth it. This was not just about taking back a company. It was about reclaiming her life and building a legacy of strength for her daughter. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived a cool, crisp morning 6 weeks after Grace was born. Lucius was expecting a routine victory lap. The press was already lauding his incredible turnaround of the brand. He had prepared a triumphant speech about record-breaking sales from Giselle's latest collection and his bold vision for the future. Cress, however, was preparing for battle. She left Grace in the loving care of Mrs. Peterson. She didn't dress in a flashy, attention-grabbing gown. Instead, she chose a custom-tailored suit of her own design, made from a deep charcoal grey wool that her grandfather would have admired. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional chignon, and her face, though tired from sleepless nights with a newborn, was set with a resolve of forged steel. As David Chen held the door of the car for her, outside the corporate tower that bore the Montclair name, he gave her a final reassuring nod. "Ready, Ms. Bishop?" She took a deep breath, the city air cool and clean. She thought of her grandfather's letter of her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib. She was no longer the broken, weeping woman who had fled into the night. She was a phoenix, risen from the ashes, and she was about to claim her sky. "I'm ready," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and power that was entirely her own. The Montclair Couture boardroom was on the 50th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary of power overlooking the sprawling city. It was designed to intimidate with a long, imposing table of polished black granite and chairs that resembled minimalist thrones. The shareholders and board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women in expensive suits, were already assembled. At the head of the table sat Lucius Montclair, radiating an aura of absolute command. He was tanned, smiling, the very picture of a man at the apex of his success. Beside him, in a seat of honor, usually reserved for the COO, was Giselle Dubois, looking smug and victorious in a shockingly red dress. She was not a board member, but her presence was a clear statement of her power and influence within Lucius's new world order. "As you can see from the preliminary reports," Lucius began, his voice smooth and confident, "Giselle's Metamorphosis collection has not only garnered universal acclaim, but has also driven sales up by 200% this quarter. Our stock price is at an all-time high. The future of Montclair Couture has never been brighter." He launched into a self-congratulatory speech filled with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and brand actualization. He painted a picture of a future built on his singular, brilliant vision. The board members nodded along their expressions, ranging from impressed to sycophantic. It was at that moment, just as Lucius was pausing for dramatic effect, that the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman they didn't recognize. She was flanked by the formidable David Chen, whose reputation as one of the city's sharpest corporate lawyers preceded him. The woman was poised, her expression unreadable, her tailored grey suit a stark contrast to Giselle's flamboyant red. She radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. Lucius frowned, irritated by the interruption. "I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. Security." But before anyone could move, David Chen stepped forward, placing a slim leather portfolio on the granite table. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Montclair. We are precisely where we are supposed to be." Cress stepped into the room, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the marble floor. Her eyes swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Giselle's confused sneer, before finally landing on Lucius. Lucius stared at her. Recognition dawned, slowly contorting his features into a mask of pure disbelief. This was Cressida, but it wasn't. The timid, accommodating woman he had discarded was gone. This woman was a stranger, powerful, confident, and looking at him not with heartbreak, but with an unnervingly calm detachment like a scientist observing a specimen. "Cressida," he finally stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady, filling the suddenly silent room, "is Ms. Bishop, and I am here to attend my first shareholders' meeting." A confused murmur rippled through the room. "Shareholder," one of the board members scoffed. "With all due respect, the shares held by employees and minor investors don't grant access to this meeting." David Chen opened his portfolio. "Ms. Bishop is not a minor investor," he stated calmly, sliding official notarized documents across the table towards the board's chairman. "She is the sole beneficiary of the Robert Bishop Blind Trust. As of 2 months ago, she has taken active control of that trust." The chairman, a portly man named George Finney, picked up the documents, his eyes widening as he read. "The Bishop Trust, but that's been dormant for decades. It's a founding stake." His voice trailed off as the implication hit him. He looked up, his face pale. "To be precise," David Chen continued, "the trust holds 52% of the voting shares of the parent company, Montclair Holdings International. My client, Ms. Cressida Bishop, is the new majority owner." The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of pure shock. You could have heard a pin drop. Giselle's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The board members stared first at the documents, then at Cress, their minds scrambling to process the impossible truth. Lucius's face had drained of all color. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. "That's impossible," he breathed, shaking his head. "It's a lie. My father, your father knew." Cress said, her voice cutting through his denial like a shard of glass. "He knew that the foundation of this entire empire belonged to my grandfather, the man whose artistry he built his brand upon, and then conveniently forgot. You, however, seem to have been kept in the dark." She walked slowly around the table until she stood directly opposite him. "You spoke of your vision for the future," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But your vision is one of debt disposability and disrespect for the legacy that made this company great. You fired craftsmen who had dedicated their lives to this house to fund her overpriced, overhyped collections. She gave a curt nod towards a horrified Giselle. You leveraged the company's assets to fund your own ego. You have mistaken flash for substance and buzz for value. She placed her hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table. Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder. This board is adjourned. A new meeting will be called tomorrow to elect a new board of directors. Mr. Montclair, your position as CEO and chairman is terminated. You have 1 hour to clear your personal belongings from your office. Security will escort you out. Lucius just stared at her, speechless, his empire crumbling around him in the space of 5 minutes. "You can't do this," he finally whispered, his voice cracking with desperation and rage. Cress leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, intense pitch for his ears alone. "You once told me to focus on my little hobby. You were right. I found one. It's called owning your entire world. You said a son would be good for the brand's legacy. You were wrong. A daughter is." With that, she straightened up and addressed the stunned room. "My name is Cressida Bishop, and I am the future of this company." The silence in the boardroom stretched for a full 10 seconds, a vacuum of pure shock that sucked all the air from the room. Then it fractured. Lucius Montclair, who had stood frozen as if turned to stone, finally came back to life, but as a grotesque parody of his former self. The charismatic control vanished, replaced by a raw, sputtering rage. "Fraud!" he roared, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the black granite table, a gesture that lacked its intended power and only betrayed his desperation. "This is a fabrication, a pathetic, vengeful fantasy. My lawyers will bury you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Cress didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a pillar of calm in his storm. "On the contrary, Lucius," she replied, her voice level and cold. "You are the one who has no idea. You never did. You saw a quiet wife, not a founder's heir. You saw a hobby, not a legacy. Your blindness is not my problem." Her composure seemed to enrage him further. He turned his pleading, wild eyes to the board members, the men and women who had idolized him just minutes before. "Finney, tell her this is absurd. We are Montclair Couture. George Finney." The chairman meticulously avoided Lucius's gaze. His attention suddenly glued to the documents in his hands, as if they were the most fascinating text he had ever read. The other board members followed suit, shuffling papers, checking their phones, doing anything to avoid being caught in the blast radius of their fallen leader. They were sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water. Their allegiance had already shifted their minds furiously, calculating how to best position themselves in this new regime. Seeing no help there, Lucius's fury collapsed into a pathetic, desperate plea. "Cressida, Cress, please," he whispered, the change in tone jarring. "We can talk about this. There's been a misunderstanding. We can work something out, a settlement." It was the sight of Giselle that cut him short. Her face, a mask of horror, was twisted with a fury that mirrored his own. But her anger was aimed at him, the man whose power had been her shield and her platform. With a strangled cry of disgust, she shot Cress a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, grabbed her ludicrously expensive handbag, and fled. Her stiletto heels clicked a frantic, panicked rhythm on the marble floor, the sound of an era of cheap spectacle running for its life. Her exit seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. Lucius deflated the fight, draining out of him, leaving a slumped, hollowed-out man. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked his age. The two security guards who entered the room were almost a mercy, their impassive presence putting an end to the humiliating spectacle. They flanked him, their quiet professionalism a stark contrast to his emotional disintegration. As they led him toward the door, he finally looked at Cress one last time, his eyes searching for something. Pity, regret, a flicker of the woman he once knew. He found nothing but the cool, steady gaze of a stranger who now owned his entire world. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing with a profound finality. The reign of Lucius Montclair was over. The boardroom was still thick with tension. Cress allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment, letting the new reality cement itself in the minds of everyone present. Then she turned to the pale-faced chairman. "Mr. Finney," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Please schedule the extraordinary meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. My office will forward you the agenda and the list of my proposed new board members. You are all welcome to tender your resignations beforehand if you feel you cannot align with the new direction of this company." It was a clear, professional dismissal. David Chen gave a slight, satisfied nod, gathering his papers. As the shaken board members filed out, avoiding her eyes, he placed a steadying hand on her arm. "You were magnificent, Ms. Bishop." Cress let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep sense of exhaustion and a startlingly clear sense of purpose. "This was just the first step, David," she said. "The real work starts now." Her first day as chairwoman of Montclair Holdings was a blur of calculated action, but she didn't begin in the executive suite. She bypassed the elevators and took the service stairs down to the workshops, the true heart of the company. When she entered, a hush fell over the room. The remaining artisans, the cutters, seamstresses, and textile experts looked up from their work, their faces etched with the anxious uncertainty of people who had grown used to the axe falling without warning. She gathered them together, standing not on a platform, but among them on the worn wooden floor. "My name is Cressida Bishop," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and sincerity. "Some of you may have known my grandfather, Robert Bishop." A few of the older workers exchanged surprised glances. An elderly tailor at the back, a man with hands gnarled from 60 years of holding a needle, let out a soft gasp. He remembered. "My grandfather believed that a garment's soul is in its fabric and its stitch." Cress continued, her gaze sweeping over their faces. "He believed in substance, in quality, in the irreplaceable value of a master's hand. This company was built on that belief, and under my leadership we are returning to it." She then announced her first executive order, the immediate reinstatement of every single craftsman Lucius had fired, with full back pay and a formal apology from the company. A wave of stunned disbelief was followed by a ripple of applause that grew into a heartfelt ovation. The old tailor, his eyes glistening with tears, stepped forward. "Robert Bishop," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was the finest man I ever knew. He would be so proud of you today, miss." In that moment, Cress wasn't just a CEO. She was a promise fulfilled, a legacy restored. Over the next few weeks, the transformation of Montclair Couture was seismic. Cress's Phoenix agenda was not just about a hostile takeover. It was a complete cultural and creative resurrection. The new motto she installed, etched onto the lobby wall, where a giant portrait of Lucius used to hang, was substance over spectacle. She walked through the design studio, which felt sterile and soulless under Giselle's tenure. Tucked away in a corner, she found Helen, a veteran pattern maker in her late 60s, who was quietly packing her things assuming she would be next to go. Cress approached her and asked to see her personal sketchbook. Hesitantly, Helen revealed pages filled with designs of breathtaking elegance and structural genius ideas Lucius and Giselle had dismissed as too classic. Helen, Cress said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not accepting your resignation. I'm offering you the position of head designer." The woman stared at her speechless as Cress explained her new vision, a company led by the talent that had been its bedrock all along. The most symbolic change was the C-suite itself. Lucius's office had been a monument to his ego, all black marble chrome and oversized modern art with a desk the size of a small car. Cress had it all stripped out. The dark walls were painted a warm, inviting white. Sunlight, once blocked by imposing blinds, was allowed to flood the space. In place of the massive desk, she brought in a large communal work table covered in fabric swatches and sketchbooks, and in the sunniest corner, she placed a beautiful handcrafted bassinet. Her daughter Grace would often sleep there as Cress worked, a living, breathing symbol of the company's new life, a future that was female, nurturing, and creative at its core. One evening, months after the takeover, Cress stood at the vast window of that transformed office, holding a sleeping Grace in her arms. The city lights glittered below, no longer mocking her, but spread out before her like a kingdom of her own making. She thought of the woman she had been, the heartbroken wife, fleeing a party in a borrowed gown, the terrified mother-to-be huddled in Mrs. Peterson's attic room. She thought of the weight of her grandfather's key in her palm, the key that had unlocked not just a fortune, but the strength that had been inside her all along. The world was calling her story a tale of revenge. But as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she knew it was something more profound. Revenge was a fire that consumed itself, leaving only ash. What she had done was an act of restoration. She had saved a legacy from ruin and built a future for her child. She was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was the architect of her own destiny, a creator, a leader, and a mother. She had walked out of her old life broken, but in doing so had discovered the parts of herself that were truly unbreakable. Her reign, the reign of a bishop, had only just begun. And there you have it, the incredible story of Cressida Bishop, a story that proves that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest souls. She went from a broken, pregnant wife with nothing to her name to the powerful leader of a fashion empire, not through revenge, but through resilience, intelligence, and by reclaiming a legacy she never knew she had. Her journey reminds us that our true strength often lies dormant, hidden in our history, and in our character, just waiting for a crisis to awaken it. It's a powerful lesson that sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly find yourself and build something even more magnificent in its place. What did you think of Cress's ultimate power move? Was Lucius's downfall everything you hoped it would be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and poetic justice, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of triumph, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for listening.